now we're going to be talking about marginal product of labor. So marginal product of labor is the change in quantity over the change in labor. I think the best way to think about it is the additional production from hiring one more worker. So the additional quantity produced from hiring one additional worker. So here we have an example of marginal product. So remember, for marginal product, we need to have the change in quantity, the change in labor, and we need to take the change in quantity divided by the change in labor to get the marginal product of labor. So in this example, we have labor as number of workers, we have quantity as number of shoes, and then we determine the change in quantity, change in labor, and the marginal product of labor. So in this example, let's say we're moving from 10 workers to 20 workers, and the quantity of shoes produced changes from 1,000 to 2,000. So the change in quantity is going to be 1,000 additional shoes are produced by those 10 additional workers. So we're going to take the 1,000 change in quantity and divide that by 10, which is the change in labor, to get 100. So we can do that moving down. So if we did that for the change in marginal product of labor, moving from 20 to 40, we would get 8,000. So change in quantity, moving from 2,000 to 10,000, and the change in labor moving from 20 to 40. And that would give us 8,000 divided by 20, which is 400. So as mentioned previously, diminishing marginal product is effectively what occurs when you add additional workers. At a certain point, adding additional workers or additional inputs is they're going to produce less additional quantity as the number of workers or the number of inputs increase. And the reason for that, and kind of a helpful example that I like to think about, is imagine you are producing t-shirts and you have one machine, and that machine can have a maximum of 4 workers working at that machine at one time. So if you have 4 workers, they're being as productive as possible. But let's say you want to increase production but don't want to buy a new machine. So you hire one additional worker. So that worker will be able to produce more when the other 4 workers are sick, are on vacation, when they are on lunch or on a break. That worker will be able to step in and produce when those workers are not able to. But that worker will not be as productive as the 4 previous workers because that worker cannot work all of the time. So because of that, the 5th worker hired is actually decreasing the additional amount of product produced. And that will continue to occur as you add additional and additional workers up until the point where you will actually have negative marginal product. So if you add an additional worker, they actually decrease the amount of additional product that is produced. So moving now back to costs. Costs can be broken into 2 separate buckets. So you have fixed costs, which do not vary with the quantity of output produced. You pay those fixed costs if you produce a lot of stuff or if you produce nothing. Or variable costs, which are costs that vary with the quantity of output produced. And so you have total costs, which are total variable costs plus total fixed costs, and that gives you total costs. So here's an example of total fixed costs and total variable costs. So note that the total fixed costs here are constant at every single quantity of output. Variable costs are not constant though, and that is because as you are adding additional units produced, variable costs can increase or decrease. And so in this example, notice that there are different amounts of increase in variable costs as you're moving from one quantity to the next quantity. And note that that amount varies depending on where you are on the quantity produced line. And so when you take total fixed cost plus total variable costs, that gives you total costs. So the total cost of production for this firm. So when you have costs, it's important to actually graph them, because graphing costs can actually help you see where you should be producing. And so note in our graph, we have fixed costs as being constant. So fixed costs are not changing. Variable costs are increasing, and total costs are increasing as well. And note that as you produce more and more stuff, the gap between variable and fixed costs is going to increase, because as you produce more, fixed costs are going to be divided over a larger and larger quantity, and that variable costs are just going to keep increasing as you produce more. So marginal costs are an important way we can see the increase in total costs from producing one more unit. And so marginal costs are the change in total cost over the change in quantity. And so let's take a look at a marginal cost example. So we have here quantity, so number of shoes, in this case produced. We have the change in the quantity, we have the total costs, and the change in total costs. So remember, to determine marginal cost, we need to take the change in total cost and divide that by the change in quantity. So to do that, we're going to take 2,000 in this first example at a quantity of 2,000. So take 2,000 divided by the change in quantity, so 1,000, moving from 1,000 to 2,000, and that's going to give us a marginal cost of 2. If we're moving from 2,000 to 10,000, that's going to be a change in quantity of 8,000 and a change in total cost of 2,000. So in this case, we're going to take 2,000 divided by 8,000, which is going to give us a marginal cost of 25 cents. So note that marginal costs can increase and decrease over different parts and different production points as well. So when we graph marginal cost, we can very clearly see that marginal costs are not a straight line, not an exponential line. Marginal costs are usually kind of hook-shaped. And so in this example, it's a little bit extreme, but you can kind of see that hook shape here. So we're starting here, and then that hook shape is going to get to the lowest point, and then it's going to start increasing.